Good morning. Today we're here with the Missouri Department of Conservation, who is going to share some amazing and free, can I say even louder, free resources that are available to you. And so just a quick intro, ladies, if you don't mind. Pre-pandemic, the State Department was being really passionate about social studies and science because they're just two contents that are very underserved. And they brought in a professor, Nell Duke from Michigan, who was really saying how important social studies and science instruction is to build the schema of becoming better readers. And we've kind of kicked the baby out with the bathwater in focusing so much on reading that we've really, what Nell Duke said is created the poverty or the learning gap even more with our poverty kids because they're not getting that social studies and science schema. So the state was really on a fast track trying to encourage districts to really rethink how are we going to get social studies and science in, and then the pandemic hit. So that's taken a little pause, but I think now we're trying to get back in the swing of things, and we know we have to be servicing our kids with that content. And so that led to what me being interested in this project and just really wanting to shout out for the rooftops that your group has created these great resources for science. So thank you for being here, and I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Thank you, Shauna. Well, my name is Mary Beth Factor, and I also have my counterpart, Wendy Parrott. We actually share the same role. We are the Discover Nature Schools curriculum coordinators. We'll talk about this a little bit more, but we actually have 6 curriculums currently, and we have just released a kindergarten curriculum. And in this kindergarten curriculum, to go along with what Shauna was saying, we really had focused on ELA. And so there's actually 14 different trade books, and they vary from fiction to nonfiction, and they are implemented into the lessons themselves. Our phenomenon, as you can see, is bears through the seasons. But don't be deceived, because even though black bears is the focus, students are still going to be growing acorns from a seed. They're going to still be documenting and looking at different variables of how water and light affect that seed. They might be tracking sunshine and the number of hours daylight. They might be looking outside and going outside and documenting the kind of weather that they see. And again, all of this gets connected back to those English language arts, and it gets connected back into those 14 different trade books that are implemented inside of this curriculum. Wendy, did you want to go ahead and introduce yourself as well?
So hello, I'm Wendy Parrott, and we're just excited to share our new curriculum with you today, and hope it's something that might be useful in your classroom.
And if you have any questions at all, please feel free to go ahead and throw them into the chat. I actually have the chat box open in front of me, so I'll make sure to answer the questions right away. All right. So we have on our agenda today, we're going to introduce ourselves, and then you're going to get to introduce yourself. And then we'll talk a little bit more about Discover Nature Schools, and then we're going to dive into the Discover Nature Schools Kindergarten Bears Through the Season, where we are going to take a closer look at the teacher guide overview, student guide overview, how certain pieces are implemented into the curriculum, as well as how to order those materials. And then we also have kits and transportation agreements that go along with certified and trained teachers in this curriculum. So we will review the process for that. And again, if you have any questions at all throughout, please feel free to go ahead and throw those in the chat, or you can always reach out to Wendy and myself via email. We'll make sure to post our email up at the end. Okay.
So as Mary Beth shared, we are curriculum coordinators for the Department of Conservation. Just so you know, we are funded by a dedicated sales tax. So you as families, your student families have all paid for the materials. So when we say everything's free, that's why. You have actually already kind of paid for it in advance. We also have others with us in our team. So Libby Block, who is second from the left, is our designer. And Lynn Goggins on the far left in this picture, she is the one who takes care of all the magic behind the scenes. She's putting together our teacher kits, she manages the grants, and we'll share you more about both of those later in our presentation.
All right, so now that we've introduced ourselves, if you can please come off of mute and talk about who you are. And so if you can share what your name is, where you're calling from, what do you do, and then why are you here?
I'll kick it off. I'm Seth Mays. I was actually a teacher in Missouri for about 5 years. One of those years was in Kentucky, but I am already forgetting about that 1 year. So most of my time was in Missouri. I was an ELA teacher, and the awesome thing currently what I do is I work with Shauna, trying to get the good word out about curriculum in Missouri. But when I was a teacher in Southeast Missouri, one thing that we always did, especially as ELA, I would always try to figure out how to tie in these great resources from the conservation department. We would have them come to our room and they would bring these giant totes of skins and tracks and fossils and I mean all kinds of stuff, and then we would use it in ELA to write with. So we would use that information, that schema that we were then learning to write essays and things like that. But I'm really excited today about this because I still have a lot of friends in Missouri, so this could be a great resource for them as well.
Thanks, Seth.
I am Carrie Draley. I am the principal and superintendent of the Montrose School District. We are a very small school. I have about 90 students, K through 12, and I'm on here just because small schools, we struggle with getting good, high quality resources. And so when I saw Shauna's email come out about resources, it got me excited.
Awesome. We're so happy to hear that, Carrie. Actually, I live down in West Plains, Missouri, and I have a neighbor of mine who is at Junction Hill, and that's another little small school too. And I wound up sharing with her both the kindergarten as well as the first grade, and she immediately had said, "When can I get my hands on this?" So I know, and I've heard the challenge of trying to get high quality curriculum, especially into more of a rural school district. So we're happy to help wherever we possibly can. And if this meets your needs, we are very, very happy about that. All right.
So you may or may not be familiar, but Last Child in the Woods, written by Richard Louv, came out in 2007. And it shared about how much our society is changing and has changed, and how children are just not outside as much as they used to be. It doesn't matter if they're rural, urban, suburban, kids are just in general inside. And so as a department, Missouri Department of Conservation wanted to address that. And to do so, we developed the Discover Nature Schools program, which, as Mary Beth said, are 6 different curriculum. And all of these are designed to get kids outside in nature doing authentic real world exploration and inquiry. So the first unit, Nature Revealed, is our preschool unit, and it meets the early Missouri learning goals and is aligned with DESE standards and provides seasonal framework as well as thematic ways to look at nature in the preschool years. Today, we're going to spend most of our time talking about the new Discover Nature Schools kindergarten Bears Through the Seasons. So I'm not going to go into detail about that now. We have what's called Nature Unfolds, and when it was written for a grade band. So kindergarten through 2nd grade, that is not how we're going to do business moving forward. But it is aligned with, unfortunately, the GLEs. So we have crosswalks to help understand how it ties in now with next generation in Missouri learning standards. And it ties in life cycles, plants and for both plants and animals, weather and seasonal changes. And with this unit, there's a teacher guide, a student book, and a science notebook for kids. The same teacher guide, science notebook, and student book are available with Nature Unleashed, which is a 3rd through 5th grade curriculum. And it focuses around the 3 major Missouri ecosystems, prairie, pond, and forest. But it also has opportunities to expand into additional ecosystems. And the goal is for kids to learn about those ecosystems and components, to learn about specialized structures that plants and animals have and their food webs in each of those ecosystems. Nature Unhooked is geared for middle school, and it aligns with several 16 next generation and Missouri learning science standards, and is all things water. So it looks at water through the lens of physical life and chemical science, and does a lot of focus around our Missouri waters, rivers, ponds, lakes, all of those, and looking at macroinvertebrates. And then finally, Nature Unbound is the high school unit, and it has a lot of career opportunity focus. And kids learn, it's kind of like the ecology part of a biology classroom. And it's then students will use that knowledge to apply with a resource management plan that they develop in the last chapter, taking all their knowledge. Oh, and one more thing, I'm sorry. The Nature Unhooked also includes project-based learning. So that's an element in that curriculum as well.
Okay, and I want to let you know that I have input into the chat box, the Discover Nature Schools homepage from our NVC teacher portal. Anyone can access that to be able to view the different curriculums. So if you want to look at the different samples, you can absolutely do that. And then I also dropped a link in there for the DNS kindergarten. So if you were to click on that, you could have access to the digital materials as well as the teacher guide to be able to view. The login is required to be able to see both of those. So you'll just have to log on and create an account. And then after that, you're free to go and explore. And then we also have a link that we'll share a little bit later on about how to order materials and resources if you want to have a printed copy in front of you to be able to share with your teachers. So we'll make sure to drop that in there. Okay. All right, so we have just released and just launched a new curriculum for kindergarten specifically, and it actually aligns to all of the Missouri learning standards as well as all the next generation science standards. So I think that it was 14 Missouri learning standards and 13 next generation science standards. And we are very happy to say that we also meet all of them, especially even the physical science standards as well. Students are exploring pushes and pulls and how does it change direction. And it's all based around the phenomenon of bears. So we have a storyline where the southern half of Missouri has millions of acres of bear habitat that is meeting the needs of bears for them to be able to survive and prosper in our state. And so that's the umbrella storyline that it has been set up. And so oftentimes whenever the students are going through their student guide, they'll have questions that are bear related that'll take them back to this storyline again. There are 4 units. It does follow a seasonal pattern starting with summer, and then we go into fall, winter, and then spring. So there's 8 lessons in the summer, 5 in the fall, 4 in the winter time, and then there's 5 again in the springtime. We also firmly believe in students being able to document their learning as they go along. And so we've implemented something called a noticing and wonderings chart, which is very, very similar to a KWL chart. And it looks like this. And so, and our lessons are set up under the 5E model of learning. So explore before explain, and we start with engage. And so in the engage portion, the teacher is always introducing the what I notice and what I wonder chart for that particular lesson. And so they start pondering questions about what do they already know about the topic, and then what are some things that they can already see. So this is a nice way to be able to talk about like questions. Oftentimes wonder questions end in question marks, and what I notice sometimes end in a statement. So I notice that the air gets colder outside as our season progresses towards winter time or fall time from the summertime. But maybe a wonder question might be, but I wonder why that happens. And so we're always documenting at the very, very beginning, and then we go back and we visit this again during the elaborate, so towards the end of the lesson, to be able to see if we can answer some of our questions, but also do we need to add more questions? So it really helps to engage our students into being in charge of their own learning and having ownership in their learning. And being able to say, yeah, I did learn that. We were able to answer that. And since now I have that question, now I have that question. And that's good. That's a really good skill for students to learn, is to continue to ask questions, even if we can't get to every single one. In terms of how the lesson overview is created, so this is what a lesson would look like. So for instance, this one has the sun at the very top of the page, and that indicates that this is a summer lesson. And then there's a number, and then there's a lesson letter. So you might have 1A, 1B, 1C, 1D. And then there's the corresponding student pages that correspond to 1A, 1B, 1C. And this is just because it's just a little bit easier for students to understand the letters than it's 1.1 or 1.2. There is an investigative phenomenon for every lesson to follow. So that's the question that students are learning and they're being guided through the process. Sometimes the investigative phenomenon might go past 3 different lessons. So it might say, how do I keep cool in the summertime, or how do I stay warm in the wintertime? And maybe that's something that gets covered over the course of 3 different lessons. We have our estimated time, our standards that are on there, so you can see which Missouri Learning Standard this particular lesson hits, as well as the next generation science standard. And then the 3D components as well. So what is the science and engineering practice, as well as this disciplinary core idea and the cross-cutting concept? So is the students going to be learning or applying this by doing patterns? Are they going to be looking at cause and effect? Maybe they're going to be looking at scale, proportion, and quantity. And maybe all of this relates then to weather and climate. There's a list of materials, and then we also have our teacher portal resources. So just as a quick link, there's the education.mdc.gov/kindergarten, and the teacher can log on and they'll be able to access those digital resources. So for instance, if the teacher wants to display the nosing and the wonderings chart on the board, they can log on and they can display that. All right, Wendy, did you want to talk about the other side?
So as a quick overview, there's 5 components for each lesson. It always begins with engaging, sparking that curiosity, engaging the students' prior knowledge. And there's always the number of minutes, so a teacher can quickly figure out, okay, this is what my full lesson looks like, and plan accordingly. Then, as Mary Beth said, always explore before explain. So this is providing hands-on opportunity, and that allows kids to create schema. So as they already have knowledge and not experience, to then when they do the explain what they saw, formulate vocabulary to support that new experience to that. Then we always want kids to be able to utilize what they've learned, so they can, through the elaborate, apply it to different situations. And finally, evaluate. And of course, evaluate is ongoing through all lessons, but a formal, like, yes, they achieved what we were hoping. So just a quick way for a teacher to be able to see that. The other thing is, along the right-hand column are thumbnails of the student guide pages. So the teacher knows what the students will be doing, activities in that book. All lessons have cross-curricular extensions. Those might be English language arts, math, physicals, or PE or arts. And then we want to connect the curriculum at home. So every lesson ends with a take it home letter that encourages families to do these activities with their children and enforce that learning and extend it into the home.
And so we also have our alignment chart. This is always at the very beginning of every single one of our curriculums. And so you can kind of see that we have one standard, and this covers an earth and space science standard. So use and share observations of local weather conditions to describe patterns over time. And so this actually gets bundled, and it gets bundled between 2 different lessons. So 1A, science of summer, and then 1B, what is weather. So even though we might have just one standard, it gets met between those 2 different lessons. Likewise, we have our 3 different science standards, and those are going to be met within those 3 different lessons off to the side there. So there's physical science, as well as there's an engineering and technology standard that gets met there between those 3. So it's kind of the structure of what our alignment chart looks like. This is what our lessons at a glance looks like for the unit. So this is summer lessons at a glance. We'll go through this piece by piece. We have our suggested timeline for Unit 1 summer, and we always should be starting out with the introduction to anchoring phenomenon, and that introduces that storyline overall and gets the idea of what do we really know about bears. And then there's a book that goes along with it. that students are reading, as well as an online resource to our bear story map. There's several reading texts, so you can see right there that between 1, 2, 3, 4 different lessons, there are 4 different books that are introduced. Two of them are nonfiction, and then 2 of them are fiction. And then what we really tried to do is connect all of our reading texts to Epic, knowing that this is a free resource and knowing that classroom teachers have access to this as a free resource. So you should be able to find every one of our essential reading texts on Epic. We worked extremely hard to make sure that those resources were available on there. And then likewise, we have related reading texts to support content. These texts are not included in the kit for certified teachers, but these texts are suggested. So if a teacher has an opportunity to go to their local public library to be able to get Fraser Bear, A Cub's Life, or Baby Bear's adaptation, they can certainly go and do that from the library.
So the essential statements are things students will learn through the course of the lesson or unit, and the questions will allow them to, by answering those questions, they get to that essential statement, which shows that they have learned the science content needed based on the standards. And then every lesson has vocabulary associated with it as well. So there's kind of an overview of the vocabulary terms for the teacher at the beginning of each unit.
Okay. All right, so this is the introduction lessons for Black Bears in Missouri. Again, this is where we introduce that anchoring phenomenon about habitat. So the southern half of Missouri is millions of acres of bear habitat that meets the needs of bears in order for them to survive and prosper. So we start off by asking students, tell me what you know about bears and where do you think bears live? And then the teacher can log online. There's a Black Bear interactive story map that is online, and it's really, it's free. It's easy to be able to see, and students are able to see the state of Missouri as well as the different reports of black bears around the state. And they will start to see that the range of black bears is more focused to the southern half than it is to the northern half. And so they can start asking some questions of like, what's the difference between the northern half and the southern half, and why do bears want to live in the southern half? And so then they start adding that onto their noticing and wonderings chart. And this is where that gets thoroughly introduced to the teacher and how to use that chart. And then likewise, the teachers are reading the provided book called Black Bears by Jenna Leek Gleiser. And then we introduce, again, the noticing the wonderings chart, and we continue to add our observations after we're reading through the book. And it was amazing. We did this practice with some adults before, and just gathering questions from those adults. And then we read the book, and actually the book answered about 3/4 of the question already. So it was a very effective way of being able to go back and see, like, were we able to pull from that? And also really addresses comprehension as well. All right, and then the students are making black bear bands.
So students, we want them to become cubs. And so they take a black strip of paper and they tape it around, get it fit, cut out a couple ears, and put on some wiggly eyes and a pom-pom nose. And they create a headband. And then the important part of this is throughout the curriculum in the bottom right corner, you'll see that bear paw. And that bear paw symbolizes for the kids to get their headbands out for that activity. So that allows them to like presume the identity of a bear cub. So here are examples of what it looks like in practice.
And then the students are always grabbing their black bear headbands, probably about like 1/2 to 3/4 of the time that they're interacting in the units. So it's neat because they're going outside, they're practicing pushes and pulls. When they go outside, they put on their bear headband and they become the black bear. Or they go outside and they have an infrared thermometer. And this was a lot of fun, where they go outside with a black sock and a white sock. And then they're pointing the infrared thermometer after being in the sun for a few minutes, maybe even just about 5 minutes. And then they can actually see the difference between the black color versus the white color in terms of temperature. But they're the black bear, and that's their fur, that's their paws whenever they're going outside. So it's a fun little role playing too at the same time.
So there's two components of the curriculum. One component is the student guide. And the goal is for every student to have a student guide, and it can be accessed on our teacher portal electronically, but it's also a printed physical book with a really nice spiral binding so that it's easy. They're slick pages designed to be outside. They'll repel some moisture, some dirt, and they are the kids' student guide as a reader and a science notebook, and to engage them as learners about the world around us. We have the 4 units. So it begins with Summer for a Bear. And I'm going to have you all go off mute and tell me, what kind of images are you seeing in Summer for a Bear?
I see fish.
Okay, yeah.
Boating.
So when you see
Canoeing.
fish and boating, are they just pictures of fish and boats?
Kids being active outside is what I'm seeing.
Yep. So kids are fishing, kids are boating, kids are looking closely or using nets. Absolutely. So then we will move on to bears in the fall. Do the pictures change? What do you notice now?
Becomes more bear focused
So about half of our pictures are bears
and half kids.
and half kids, and kids still interacting with nature. Then we're going to move to bears in the winter. And what do you notice now?
It's all bears.
All bears, that's right. We are now fully engaged in bear thought and learning about bears and how they're behaving during the winter season. And then finally, we go to bears in the spring.
Bears in nature.
Yeah. So we're kind of taking kids along a storyline where they can identify themselves, and then as they get further and further into the material, they're more just paying attention to the world and changes of the world around them. So we're going to talk about one of the lessons specifically in the first unit.
Okay, so we have 1D as an example. We wanted to pull this out because it actually had every single one of the components in the student guide, whether it was the read together, science notebook, draw it, talk about it, all those different pieces. And so you can kind of see now that this is what that lesson overview chart, and this is what it looks like when it's filled in. So we are going to be diving into the physical science, make observations, determine the effect of sunlight on the Earth's surface with prompting and support, use tools and materials to design and build a structure that will reduce the warming effect, and then develop a simple sketch drawing or physical model to illustrate how the shape of an object helps its function. So we're going to be exploring that within this lesson. It might not necessarily, again, this gets bundled between 3 different lessons. So even if we don't necessarily go into it in full on this lesson, it'll be covered in another lesson. So these lessons are scaffolded from one to another. And that was another thing that had popped out was, how are my students able to answer this particular question as an assessment? Well, even if they don't get it covered in that first lesson, they would have covered it in the lesson prior. So that's why it's really important, and what we really push for teachers is that this lesson is meant to go from one another. The activities are not independent of one another. So there's the list of materials. They're going to be doing a data sheet as well as doing a daily temperature graph. So in addition to ELA, we also are meeting some science standards in terms of introducing students to bar graphs and what information can we determine from a bar graph. So the first part is the engage. And so we would have the students open up their student guide to the 1D tracking temperature, and then they would visit with what their guiding question is, which is the investigative phenomenon. It's a hot day, you're outside playing, how might you cool off and how might bears cool off? And then they read through the read together. And then we are going to take a look at the science notebook sun and shade review and discuss why animals such as turtles and lizards may sit in sunny areas. And then they visit their noticing and their wonderings chart. So just to kind of give a little bit more of an overview, this is what those particular pages look like.
And so you'll notice on these pages, every lesson will begin with what I notice, what I wonder. So the kids will become very familiar with those characters in question. It will always have that investigative question to help them think more deeply, as well as picture support to apply or to help direct their thoughts. And then, as Mary Beth said, there are different components. And in this lesson, all components are there. So there's a read together. And anytime you see a read together, you're going to see the little character holding the book. And this read together helps them start thinking about the phenomena and then ask what else has a temperature, so kids can start discussing the ideas in this engaged portion of the lesson. There's also this engage is more involved. So as Mary Beth said, they're doing a review of what they've already learned. They've already talked about shade and sun. They're applying that knowledge, and then they're thinking about how that impacts a specific animal, in this case, a collared lizard. The talk about it, again, has that character. Anytime we're going to have a talk about it, we'll see that character on that page. Oh, and the science notebook, sorry, is another character. Every science notebook will be associated with that character as well.
And then we will be implementing, after doing those activities, well, what are some more things that we notice and what are some other things that we wonder? So again, the students are going to be the ones that will be essentially guiding the lesson, even though it's something that's written already. The teachers are going to be able to refer back to this chart specifically to be able to pull those questions out and say, yes, and now we are going to answer your question, Jane, or we are going to go back, we're going to answer your question, Matthew, that you have about this. And so again, it's that nice encouragement of continue to ask those questions. And that helps us to be able to learn these concepts. Then we move on to the explore. So why do outdoor pools open later in the morning or in the afternoon? And how can we test our ideas? So they're going to be setting up an investigation where they take air temperature out 3 times a day during the school day. So maybe they go outside for about 5 minutes in the morning, they go outside in noon, and then they go outside in afternoon. And all students are going to be provided with temperatures, or they're going to be provided with thermometers to be able to head outside. And so they're going to be completing the data sheet to be able to do that. And then if they are wanting to, if the teacher wants to make more copies of that, there's actually a handout following this lesson that I'll share with you. And then we have the explain at the end of the data collection period of 5 days, discuss what students notice about the chart. So again, we want to give some time for exploring. And now this is basically where the analysis starts to come in. So what do we know if temperature reading, how do we know if a temperature reading is higher than another? So at that point, students are looking at the different numbers, and hopefully they'll be able to distinguish that perhaps it's 89 degrees outside, or maybe it's 79 degrees outside in the afternoon as compared to in the morning. And so consistently, we're hoping to see a pattern emerge between the morning and the afternoon, and that the temperature starts to rise. So at that point, then the students are going to put an H on high data and then the L on the low data entries for the day. Again, a nice visual marker for them to be able to figure that out.
So as students are doing this work, they are the scientists. They are the ones making observations, recording their findings, and analyzing those findings. So they have a science notebook page to be able to use as a scientist, recording all this information and data.
And again, this is what the taking temperature data sheet looks like following the lesson. And we'll talk a little bit about the taking temperature graph as well. And then the teacher moves into the elaborate. So how else can we write this data? So it's taking that data and then applying it into a visual tool, which in this case is going to be a bar graph. And so what the students can do is that they're going to use this taking temperature graph here, and the teacher can distribute this out to the students. And then they can take little sticky notes, and then they can mark down where the temperature is at. So at this point, this is where the teacher can say, okay, on this column, this is what we're seeing here. This is going to be temperature. And as the temperature goes up, we want to put our bar graph or a sticky note to where our corresponding temperature is at. So again, it's really helping out build those math skills in bar graphing. And then are the patterns the same each day? So they will do this for each and every day. And then again, they go back to their noticing and their wonderings chart, and they input their observations into that. And then there's a formative assessment. So based upon what they've learned about sun and shade specifically, where might a bear rest to get cool? So again, this was a concept that was discussed in 1C. We're revisiting it again in 1D, and we're reinforcing it from the concepts that we had learned from this particular lesson.
So the students have a draw it, and this is our fourth type of page integrated within the student guide. And again, another character, and this is the way they will demonstrate their understanding, and for the teacher to quickly be able to say, yeah, the kids understand and have learned the lesson, or no, I need to review it. They have not fully comprehended what was the goal of the lesson. But every lesson will end with some sort of an evaluate activity. So following lessons are cross-curricular extensions, and they're quite varied. So this one is art related. So the kids, much like the evaluate, will draw the area that a black bear might be found on a hot day, and then draw area that a bear might be found on a cloudy, cool day, and be able to explain why would the bear be in one place on one day in a different area on a different day. Again, then using, sharing their thinking and their understanding as they create their artwork. Oh, and the taking it home, sorry. So again, we really want to connect this learning home. We want children to interact with their families and for there to be discussions at home. So there's a variety of ways that happen in this particular time. The child's going to imagine that they're a turtle, and the families can talk about different kinds of weather and where around their home would they go warm up. Have they actually seen turtles in their area or in their neighborhood? Sometimes they're an activity for the family to do together, just ways to expand that learning and connect it home.
All right, so I know that we keep alluding to this teacher kit, and so Wendy and I wanted to delve back into that a little bit more. So for any interested classroom teacher, and they can be private or a public school teacher, this is not for a homeschool teacher, and that's mainly due to budgetary confinement. But we did develop teacher kits. And so this is on a 1 to 50. So let's say, for instance, you have 2 teachers in a kindergarten class, and they teach 25 students each. So that's 50 students, they would get 1 kit each. Now, if you have more than that and they exceed that 50 number, they would actually get 2 kits to be able to teach, which means that they would get 14 of the essential, all 14 of the essential reading texts. They would get thermometers, they have a bear claw, they have this is my favorite, bear fur swatch, which they can also put outside into the sun and be able to take that infrared thermometer and see just how hot do bears actually get in the summertime. They have a bear's skull. And so there's a lot more too that's within that. There's even materials in there to be able to make the bear headbands, including the black construction paper, pom-poms, googly eyes, all of that. And so again, this is eligible for certified classroom teachers after a training on a 1 to 50 student per kit ratio.
Because we're doing outside learning, we really want kids outdoors, and most the activities are designed to be done in the schoolyard, but we also want kids to visit different areas and see maybe possibly an area that is a forest where a bear might make its home. So we provide transportation reimbursement grants as well to trained staff who attend one of our teacher workshops, and they can visit an area. It can be a natural outdoor area in DC site, a county or city park, state park, a pumpkin patch, something of that nature. And we will reimburse up to $7 per student for the actual transportation reimbursement. So if the cost of the bus costs $5.37, we would take that for each student, or we would take that and reimburse that actual cost. We do ask that students stay within 100 miles, but usually teachers don't want to take kids further than that. But we just really want for the kids to take some of their schoolyard learning and do those same types of activities in a more natural area.
And then Carrie, just as an FYI, I know that we're talking a lot about kindergarten. First grade is going to be released in December, and it actually will have the same thing where there's a teacher kit agreement as well as a transportation grant that goes along with that too. And so I just wanted to make sure that you were aware that this is going to be available for first grade. And then following that, second grade should be released by the next fiscal year or the next school year. And again, teacher kit as well as transportation grant will also be available.
And we have transportation reimbursement grants for every grade level, kindergarten through high school. We do not have it for pre-K.
And I did want to share with you, I popped a link into the chat, and to be able to get training, you will need to connect up with your local conservation educator. And so that link will take you to this Google Drive folder, which has this PDF. And all you have to do is just drop down to where the map is at, connect up your county that you are in to the number. And then if you pop back up to wherever your number is at, you can contact the conservation educator here from this resource. And then they've done one-on-one trainings before, they've gone to schools before to do training, so they are very accommodating. And then in terms of how do you who do I contact for trainings through CE, and then where can I order materials? There is a second link that I popped into the chat, and that actually takes you to the materials and resources link. And I just wanted to kind of quick guide. So here's the MDC teacher portal, and this is the homepage. And I'll pop that right into the chat. So if you clicked on that link, this would be taken over to here. To order your materials and your resources, you are going to need to have an account. But once you get that set up, you'll go through this process that I'm going to show you. So you'll be able to click on materials and resources at the top of the band here. And after you click on materials and resources, you'll come down and you'll click order classroom materials. And then you'll click on DNS material order form. And then you can fill in your information. You can fill in your Missouri teacher classification, or if you're a school administrator, you'll fill in your information here. What's your classroom size? We have superintendents, for instance, or principals that will fill in 140. And it's because they have 140 students maybe that are all in kindergarten. That's fine. If you've got 25 in kindergarten class, that's fine. If you've got 10 in kindergarten class, that's fine. We accommodate quite the amount. And I had my profile set up to a homeschool. Whenever you go to enter your school name, just make sure that you allow space to be able for your school facility to be able to drop down. We actually input a lot of addresses on here from the DESI system, so you might already be in the system. And then you'll pop on down to where it says DNS Materials. If you state that you are a Missouri teacher or a school administrator, you can actually order the teacher guide, and then you can also order whatever quantity you need for the kindergarten student guide. And I always recommend getting at least maybe 2 or 3 more than what your classroom is, because if you have turnover of your students and you have a new student coming in, you can always hand them the student guide and then they can get started right away. And then likewise, any of our other materials that Wendy had mentioned, those are all up here to be able to order. So again, order whatever quantity you possibly need. And then afterwards, click submit. It takes about 7 to 10 business days to arrive at the mailing address that is listed. And if you have any questions at all, always feel free to reach out to Wendy or myself. And with all of that, I am going to pop one final thing into the chat, and that is contact information for myself and for Wendy if you need to reach out to us. But we are open and happy to answer any questions at all about our Discover Nature Schools, Bear Student Unit, or any of our Discover Nature Schools units.
One thing I wondered if a teacher, first of all, just amazing resources that you ladies have pulled together. Kids love nonfiction, and the fact that you have nonfiction, ELA, you've laid it all out there for the teacher with great vocabulary. You're also honoring the 3D science standards and showing the cross-cutting concept. So just great. As schools come on to get a free set, if I'm a first grade teacher and I'm using it this year, and then I'd like to use it again next year, can teachers order a new set every year?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Okay.
and actually we encourage teachers to do that. So we track active status versus inactive status. And then what happens is that after 2 years, if a teacher or a principal or administrator, someone is not ordering books for that particular school, then they go inactive at that point. So we want to try to make sure that schools remain as active as they can. And so we want folks to go on and order. We want them to keep on ordering every student guide every single year.
Perfect. Well, teachers, we have a tendency to hoard one back and keep making copies.
No
Because we're
need.
afraid it may not come back. So that's great. Awesome.
Yeah.
And so, oh, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say they're designed to be written in, so they are that child's book to take home. Inside the front cover, they even write their name. And so, yeah, just order new ones as new students. You have new groups of kids.
Awesome. Well, I have copied all of the information you put into the chat. And so thank you for that. And then we'll post this video and I'll put all that information. So those quick links will be up there. Any more questions? I think Carrie hopped off the call.
No, I think it's great.
Really amazing.
I was getting so excited, Seth, whenever you said the bear pelts, and I didn't want to spoil it, but I was like, you mean like this?
Yeah. Yeah, it was like just all kinds of skins and pelts. And I mean, it was like the kids' favorite day.
Yeah.
And then someone from the conservation department showed up and they were dressed in those tan uniforms. And it was like, my kids literally thought that like Steve Irwin was walking in the room. And for me, it was great because as a teacher, it's like, that's a day that I get to kind of relax and let the conservation department teach my kids for a little while. And they loved it. And it was just, I just don't know if enough people knew about it. You know, it was like, I always telling people like, hey, there's pelts and bear skins. Like, you need to go get those. Like, those are all free. They'll bring in like bugs and all kinds of stuff to your
Birds,
classroom.
insects.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
all of it.
Yeah. So I always loved it.
That's
And
great.
Wendy, I love that you put that book at the beginning about just how much our kids are being disserviced with nature and not spending as much time in it. So if anything, I think, and it's just really aiding teachers and how we can intentionally be providing that. And again, they're naturally inquisitive, they're naturally curious.
Yep,
So
yep.
it's just such a great entry point for them.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for your time. And we were just really excited. Hopefully we'll help get the word out for your product.